From South Bend, Indiana, welcome to 3Degrees Discussions. I'm your host, Mike Vasquez. This is a podcast devoted to the stories behind the innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders in the 3D printing industry.
The sportswear industry is kind of interesting because they don't face the same regulatory challenges that the medical and aerospace sectors do, which means that they can move a little more quickly, and they're also under huge pressure to innovate. So our experience has been that in the sportswear space, they can kind of be out front of a lot of these trends. They can move more quickly, they can adopt things. And so we've seen a lot of pull from that space. But increasingly, we're starting to see more and more in aerospace and in medical and biotech. I see a massive opportunity in biotech.
That was Elissa Ross. Elissa's been working at the intersection of mathematics and manufacturing for the last 15 years. She's the CEO of Metafold, where they created a design and engineering software for additive manufacturing. Their team builds ultra-robust geometric infrastructure for 3D printing and Industry 4.0. Today, she shares her journey from mathematics to additive manufacturing and her entrepreneurial journey along the way. Before we get started, head over to www.3degreescompany.com and subscribe to the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the show anywhere you download your podcast, including Spotify, Apple, Amazon, or Stitcher. Also, if you or your company are looking for materials, qualification, or general additive manufacturing support, reach out to our team through our website or via email at info@3degreescompany.com.
All right, Elissa, thank you so much for joining the show today. Excited to kind of learn more about your story. We just met a few weeks ago at the ASTM ICAM show. So, like we start with all of our guests, we'd like to start at the very beginning. So where were you born? Where did you grow up? Do you have any kind of impactful memories from really far back in your childhood that got you kind of started on the path that you are today?
That is really starting from the beginning. But first of all, just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I'm glad to have met you, and nice to be on the show. Starting from the beginning. Okay, well, so I'm from Toronto, Canada. I actually still live in Toronto, Canada, although I've moved around a fair bit in the intervening years. And I guess my backstory is a little unusual. So the first thing to know is I am a mathematician. I went the whole way with math. I have a whole PhD in math and all that stuff, but that was not the career path I thought I would be on as a young person. And in fact, I thought I would be an artist. I was always really interested in visual things, in making things, visual art. And I think there were a few formative moments for me, though. One, which is a bit unusual, but and I'm going to date myself, but there was this Barbie that came out. And I don't know if you would remember this, Mike, but it's probably before your time, but it had a speaking mode. And one of the things that Barbie said was, "Math class is tough." And this was like there was a huge kind of, and it makes sense. There was kind of a backlash against this. People did not like it because it discourages girls or normalizes the idea that girls are bad at math. And my, wonderful second wave feminist mother was all about this, and this was a terrible thing. But I think I kind of took this up as a bit of a challenge. That no, math is well, actually, math is very hard, but not more so for women than men, of course. And so that was one of the strange formative moments for me. But I think more importantly, I started when I was in high school. I did a project for a science fair project. I did a project on math, and I chose the topic, which was tiling. So it's like a visual topic. I chose that topic so that I could make pictures because I wanted to be an artist. And so I thought, I don't want to do the science fair project. I'll just do this math project because I get to make some pretty pictures. And then what I discovered through this project was a few things, but it opened up the world of mathematics to me in a very new way, bringing in connections from so many different fields within math, and also linking the activity of pure mathematics to applications in the real world. Because it turns out that the kind of tiling I was studying relates to crystal structure. And I thought this was so mind-blowing, so beautiful. So it's kind of coming back to maybe the same beauty that I was appreciating in fine art, but in a totally different intellectual way. So that started me on the path of math. And many years later, a whole PhD later, I was working as a consultant, solving hard geometry problems in industrial applications. And that's when I was introduced to 3D printing, which we can get into. But it took a lot of years and a lot of schooling to do all that math. And then finally, it was only very, very much later that I kind of stumbled into 3D printing.
I'm always fascinated when I talk to mathematicians because I'm an engineer, so I do math. am aware of math, but my brain doesn't think probably how your brain does in terms of how you think about math and how you think about kind of tying it to the real world. So you mentioned the tiling example as kind of one kind of concrete thing that you kind of tie to the written arithmetic and things that you're writing on the page, but maybe go a little bit more deeper into that. Like what was it that kind of drew you to making some of those connections, and either both like as a student, but then kind of getting into kind of what job do you apply that to? And when you're doing a PhD in math, are you thinking like, okay, I want to be an instructor or a professor? Are you thinking of like, hey, I see these kind of applications that need to be explored in different ways and kind of push the boundaries? Like where were you kind of developing your kind of context of the world when it came to mathematics?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're right to say that as an engineer, you kind of use math. And actually, an observation from being a student was that often the engineers and the physics students would see mathematical concepts before we would as math students, because they had to use them so much more quickly. But in math, the study is pretty different. You're interested in kind of absolute truth in a lot of ways. And so, to be clear, I studied pure mathematics, which never, at its core, has the objective of applying to anything. It's a study and a pursuit of its own, interest. And this was the thing with this tiling problem, actually. It was like a purely mathematical question, which is what shapes fit together to tile a surface. And it was even described as a recreational math problem. And then it turned out to explain a very unusual phenomenon in crystallography, which is the emergence of quasicrystals. And the chemists responsible for this connection went on to win the Nobel Prize for this work. It was pretty remarkable. But so I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I am super interested in the study of mathematics for its own sake, and then the unexpected connections that get made to the real world. And this is true in the tiling example, but it comes up all the time in other spaces as well. And there's actually a link also to 3D printing, which is that before 3D printing, we did not have a way to manufacture the kinds of shapes we now make with 3D printing. I'm thinking about lattice structures. But lattice structures have been known to mathematicians for a long time. They've been explored mathematically. Even like a lot of people will know the gyroid shape. This was invented, I believe, in the 70s, or sorry, discovered in the 70s. But it was not applications driven. It was answering a question in mathematics, which is what is a minimal surface in 3D that repeats? And these are purely mathematical questions of truth, I guess you could say, and then they get applied later. They're not driven by applications.
And so talk more about kind of when did you make that kind of shift or start to really look at the manufacturing 3D printing space with your own career and kind of what you were working on, what you were thinking about?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, after finishing my studies, I started to work as a consultant, and I was working with the person who's now my co-founder at Metafold. He had started a consulting company to offer geometric expertise, mostly to architecture and engineering. We would often be called into projects where people were, putting up really fancy facades, or often the problem was really about putting flat things like windows and panels onto curved things, which were the kinds of shapes that architects were interested in exploring. And so we worked for some years in that field. And then we got called into this manufacturing project. So that's where the 3D printing came in. And this was a manufacturing project with a sportswear company that was trying to do something very ambitious with 3D printing. They were trying to make a consumer product, mass produced, at a very, high volume and scale. And they were encountering so many challenges with this that they are literally hiring mathematicians to help them overcome those challenges. And so that was a sign to me that there was a kind of a bigger problem to be solved in this space, that these new manufacturing opportunities open up a need for better design tools, better engineering tools to address the opportunity space that is there. So that's like, before that, 3D printing was not really on my radar because the concerns of 3D printing were so mundane. It was like, can you fix my mesh? It's not watertight. Like, this is not a juicy math problem. This is like super boring. So that was not interesting.
And so talk about kind of the start of Metafold and kind of what your thought process was to kind of make that leap into going from a consulting, kind of being in a consultancy and kind of moving into kind of running your own thing.
Yeah, well, in this, this is about that opportunity that we observed, this idea that there's something more than just a one-off solution for one customer, that there's a bigger need. As 3D printing grows, more and more people will be looking at these structures, and there will be a need for more advanced and capable design software. And really the observation there is that software for design is quite old now, and the mathematical tech that underpins it is actually quite deep. The way we represent surfaces digitally, there's a deep body of knowledge here that continues to deepen to this day. People still think about these topics, but it does more. It maps to conventional manufacturing more than additive manufacturing because the shapes are simpler. And so the decision to move from a consultancy to a product company came with that observation. But it's a little funny because we in like classical startup fashion, we've had a few pivots. We actually started Metafold as a 3D printer company. We built a 3D printer. This is what we thought the world needed at the time, and we now know that there's no shortage of 3D printers.
What's the time frame of this? Just so people.
This was it was like right at the beginning of COVID.
Okay. So
2020, and we built a 3D printer. So many 3D printers are there. Ours was extremely cool, like, just for the record. But we quickly recognized that this would be very hard to commercialize. And the thing with the printer that we built was that what we wanted to achieve was this kind of unlimited complexity that is the promise of 3D printing. And we wanted to help people manufacture very large scale lattices and these kind of more mathematical concepts that we thought, and we still think actually, would have great applications throughout engineering and construction and all kinds of different places. And so this printer, we had to build the hardware and the software, which is a very common story in the 3D printing industry. But what we came to realize was that the software we built as part of that was much stronger than the hardware. But some of the key pieces are still at play. So one of the principles of that was that we were streaming geometry to the printer at print time. It turns out no one was ready for this idea, and there's a lot of reasons why. But to achieve that, we had to build some fairly sophisticated mathematical technology to represent geometry and also transfer geometry very quickly on the web. And these have formed the core of our offering right now, that we have it's a geometry kernel that we have built, and also the kind of web and cloud tooling you need to work with geometry in design, engineering, software, but on the web.
And what's it like? I think you're the first Canadian entrepreneur that I've had on. So talk about kind of that journey and kind of taking that leap into running your own business, making those pivots. Like there's a lot of sacrifices you take from working at a big company, going to your small company, right? Like you've got to make revenue, you've got to look out what's your runway and things like that, all while trying to kind of fish around in the dark for what is that right? What are people going to buy, right? And
Yeah.
kind of making trade-offs at points and learning from kind of mistakes and trying to listen to the customer. So what has been your experience to date?
Yeah, I mean, all of the things you just said are very, very true. Like the signal to noise ratio is really incredible. Like there's so much noise. Let's just put it that way. And searching for that signal, trying to condense the ideas and simplify in a lot of ways the complexity. That's a core task of any startup. I'm not sure. I mean, your original question was about the Canada factor. I'm not sure that's been a huge determining factor for us. I think one thing that's a little unusual is that we did not begin working with the Department of Defense. So I hear many startups, will work with the Department of Defense and
is that still true in Canada as well as, I mean, I know it's in the US, that's pretty true.
No, this is what I mean. Like we do not have access to this enormous thing that is the US Department of Defense, and the Canadian defense landscape is a little different. So I think that's been a disadvantage in some ways, but in other ways, I think we've had to be pretty resourceful about finding our early customers, and we absolutely work globally. I actually don't think we have any active Canadian customers at this point in time, or very few, simply because it's just a small market. So we've been a kind of global company from the beginning, always looking outside our borders. At the same time, the Canadian ecosystem is quite supportive, and it gives us this kind of little bit of a community vibe of founders from Canada that is special, actually.
And how do you find some of your, like, maybe kind of dive into like what a typical customer looks like for you, or like doesn't have to go into specific details, but like, how do they find you, or are you finding them, and kind of what are you kind of typically working on with them, and kind of development of the kernel you've developed and other kind of offerings associated with that?
Yeah, and maybe the best way to answer this is to first explain what it really is that we offer.
Sure.
Which is we don't produce software. We have a software toolkit. So our capabilities are available through API only, which means that something needs to be done with that for it to be meaningful and useful for our customers. Often this looks like an integration into an existing software, or building out a utility. Some of our customers are building their own commercial software, and they will license our technology as part of that. So we make a software component and they license it, and they're able to build on top of that. Which means that a key feature of our customers is that they have their own set of expertise, and they need to focus on that, whether it's engineering, biomanufacturing, aerospace, like whatever the application is, they're usually very expert in that space, and they are getting bogged down through their geometry. And this is the problem that we come in and help just get over these geometric hurdles so that you can go scale your IP, commercialize your IP, do your large scale design and engineering studies, and you don't need to worry about waiting a million hours for your software, or we can help people kind of get their workflows out of proprietary software so that they can be commercialized. So yeah, the other part of your question is how do we find people? I mean, it's the same way that it always works. We try to make a name for ourselves in geometry and are present in all the various places that you find others in 3D printing. But I should also say that we work in manufacturing more broadly. Geometry literally everywhere in all aspects of manufacturing, and increasingly, more and more manufacturing is becoming digitized. 3D printing has been digital from the beginning, but other aspects of manufacturing are still moving in this direction, and we can help with that.
And so you talked a little bit about kind of sporting goods, architecture. Are there specific industries that are more conducive to the types of geometries, designs that your kind of software package or kind of add-on uh, really makes better? Or maybe a different way to think about that is kind of what industries are really pulling for that sort of kind of additional design, freedom, flexibility, capability that aren't really being met in the industry today? Is it are there certain leaders in that space?
I see so much potential here across all of the industries, and we have had interest and customers in pretty much every space that 3D printing touches. I think the sportswear industry is kind of interesting because they don't face the same regulatory challenges that the medical and aerospace sectors do, which means that they can move a little more quickly, and they're also under huge pressure to innovate. So our experience has been that in the sportswear space, they can kind of be out front of a lot of these trends. They can move more quickly, they can adopt things. And so we've seen a lot of pull from that space. But increasingly, we're starting to see more and more in aerospace and in medical and biotech. I see a massive opportunity in biotech. We have a customer who's making cell scaffolds for lab-grown meat, for instance. And they need these incredibly intricate structures so that they can promote cell growth. It's very hard to design those structures, and so this is the kind of thing we can help with. And then it also follows that they want to understand how these things perform prior to manufacturing them, and we can help also with the simulation of these highly complex structures. So we see a lot of pull in those sectors. But I think the other area we see a lot of traction is in people building software. Um, it is a funny thing about the 3D printing industry that when you are making hardware, you also need to often make software for it as well. And so we can help with a lot of that by just accelerate the development process by providing these very robust geometric capabilities.
And then with that, I imagine you get into printer specific issues or material specific issues or kind of broader questions, right? Of uh, there's the geometric potential of making the shape, but once you kind of get into the reality of is it FDM, is it DMLS, is it polymer powder bed, some of those constraints, some of those things change with each of those different domains, right?
Of course, absolutely. And so we try as much as possible to be agnostic to all of these things, but of course we often will work with a customer who is working with a particular process and a particular material. And then our objective is to make sure we tune the capabilities to that material and that process. So for example, we have a simulation capability that does quasi-static compression. And this is great for high impact kinds of applications like the sportswear applications. But people will want to compare different materials. And so we have validated models from partners like Carbon, like EOS and BASF as well, so that you can actually compare the results of these different materials under the same kinds of loads.
And how much of that is like, do you take kind of actual physical testing and kind of integrate it back into kind of the model or whatever your software piece you're integrating to?
We do, yeah, we do. For those kinds of things, we would always take physical validations and then incorporate it back and try to match the curve so that it really does reflect what you would hope you would see anyway in experimental validation.
Yeah. And so as the kind of core offering evolves, like where do you see kind of the company going? What's kind of on your horizon in terms of there's so many different markets. You mentioned the potential of, hey, it's not just additive, right? There's a whole kind of slew of manufacturing technologies that are digitizing that have some of this application involved. Like where are you most excited about kind of going into kind of 2025 and beyond with the company?
Yeah, I I'm always inspired by the applications that our customers are working on. This really honestly is such a privilege to be able to see the things that people are creating. And our big objective, I like to say we try to unlock engineers who are working on the, manufacturing innovation. And in an ideal world, after they've worked with Metafold, they're not thinking about their geometry. They're overcoming like that. That's just part of the process, but it's not something that they're getting stuck on or where there's any friction with the geometric steps. And so um, the vision is kind of that we're there, but we're in the background, and the in the foreground are all these amazing innovations that people are bringing to market, whether they are physical products, whether they are software products, but under the hood is this very robust geometric layer, which is the Metafold technology. And yeah, and just kind of helping people not think about the geometry as much.
And so kind of going back to this is kind of I bring it back to some more rapid fire questions at the end of
Sure.
just broader things, but kind of going back to your kind of study of math and kind of going through the PhD program, and would you give me one kind of pro and one con for kind of studying math at a PhD level? Or like kind of going
Oh,
through like your decision to go into that, like in your experience, like, hey, like I thought it was going to be like this, or I thought this was going to be different. What for someone kind of envisioning, listening to this, they're kind of in high school, they're thinking about college, or they're in college and thinking about some of their next career steps or what they might want to do. Uh, what's a what's some thoughts on that?
so it's such a good question because, I would struggle to come up with a con. I would say that. I see many, many pros. And I think, yeah, like there's nothing in my mind comparable to mathematics for simply training you to think. Um, Sadly, I do not do very much mathematics anymore, just because I'm running a business. But the tools of thinking mathematically, of breaking ideas down to their component parts, and being able to kind of define your terms before engaging in a dialogue, these are so transferable. And I think, the deeper you take these in the PhD, like it just does not hurt. I was always the kind of person who, I guess, I never saw myself like I'm not a math whiz. I'm not any kind of math genius, truly. It's just that at each step, I recognized a challenge and asked myself, could I do it? Like, could I do an undergraduate degree in math? It turns out I could. Could I do a master's? Yes, it turns out I could. Could I do a PhD? It turns out I could. But each time there was a question. And so I think that's kind of one, I guess, piece of advice is just ask the question and be okay with the outcome. Um, I guess a con of of doing math at that level is just that people find it weird.
I think
Like
of like
that's
Beautiful Mind or something like that. Is that what
yeah,
there's?
yeah. There's definitely a stereotype. And I think, on a personal level, this is a bit of a personal goal for me is to expand the people's idea of what a mathematician looks like, sounds like, does. And math professors in particular are like very bad at coming up with career ideas that are outside of academia. Like they have no idea. But I see so much opportunity, especially in people building businesses. There's such a need for problem solvers. Mathematicians are excellent problem solvers, and there's a huge need for this skill in the world. And so I really cannot recommend the study of mathematics enough. It's a fantastic course of study. It applies to so many things.
Okay. Next kind of more rapid fire question. Talking about your day to day, kind of running a business, doing all sorts of things. Are you a morning person or are you a night person? So talk through kind of what your average day looks like.
I am a very embarrassingly morning person, like extreme morning person. So I wake up very, very early, like really too early. And but it's yeah, I savor those morning hours being awake before anyone else. And that's when I get a lot of work done.
Perfect. Just preaching to the choir there. Last question. Kind of again, more fun one. Kind of what's a book or a podcast or kind of something that has inspired you in terms of the way that you think, the way that you run your business, or the way you kind of have a general outlook on life?
Ooh, that's a good one. Um, maybe I can give two.
Sure.
Uh,
No rules. No.
yeah, the in terms of business, I've read so much because I am a technical founder. So when I started Metafold, I really did not have any business sense. And all of that I have learned, and I'm still learning so much. I learn so much every day. It's been such a journey, and I love it. I've read a ton of books along the way. The book that I read more recently that I wish someone had given me 3 years ago is Crossing the Chasm. Like this is not a like unconventional choice. I'm not sure I would have been ready to receive its messages 3 or 4 years ago, but I all the same wish that I had read it earlier because I think there's a lot of insight in that book about markets that is very relevant. Um, but maybe more interesting, I read a book recently called Endurance. Are you familiar with this book?
Who's it by?
It's by Alfred Lansing. It's called, what is it called? It's called Endurance, Shackleton's Voyage to the
Oh,
Antarctic or
I've
something
heard of it. I
like
have not read that. It's
that.
on
Okay.
one of my lists. Yes. Yes.
Strong recommendation. This book is tremendous. So it was written in, I think, the late 1950s, and it's about Ernest Shackleton's uh, voyage in around 1914 to traverse the Antarctic continent. And it is the most unbelievable story, and it's a true story, and beautifully written, with many insights and gems in there, like just the hardships that these explorers, these men, endured, and also the bigger the bigger objective of doing this project at all, of crossing the Antarctic, that drive to explore is so interesting and so different, I think, from where we are in 2024 and how the world is at this particular moment. So it was a very thought-provoking book. I'm not sure it directly applies to building a business, but certainly in terms of just thinking about things in life, I loved this book.
Awesome. Well, Alyssa, thank you so much for joining the show today. Wish you the best of luck and kind of the continued years and kind of building the business out.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Thanks, Mike, for the opportunity. Great to speak with you.